In 1986, diving teams were sent out to search a lake as part of a missing persons investigation. But when they found tiny scraps of human flesh all along the shores, they realised that this case was a whole lot more sinister than they thought. So today's video is going to be another solved true crime case. Today we're going to be talking about the Woodchipper murder. But quickly, before we get into that, I do just want to thank our sponsors for making this video possible, Magellan TV. Magellan TV is my favourite documentary streaming service. I love all of their documentaries, but especially the true crime section on there, and I know you guys are loving it as well. If you're looking for a recommendation of something to watch on Magellan TV, I recently watched one of their new releases called Murder Maps, and I love this. It's a series, and each of the episodes looks at a different, like, really gruesome crime from London, like old London though, like Jack the Ripper kind of era London. And I don't know if it's just because I live here, so those kind of crimes are more scary to me, but like, they were so savage back then. I'm always so intrigued by those like really old cases. It's such a great series, and even some of the cases that they've covered in it, I'd never heard of before, so you might never have heard them before. So I really recommend that one to you guys. But Magellan TV upload between 15 and 20 hours of content every single week, so there's always going to be something new for you to watch on there. It's completely ad-free, and you can watch on pretty much any device that you have. Not only that, Magellan TV are also giving you guys a 1-month free trial to get you started. All you have to do is go to the link down below in the description of this video to sign up. Thanks again to Magellan TV for sponsoring this video. Now, before we get into it, I just want to give my usual disclaimer that I mean absolutely no disrespect to anyone that I talk about in this video. This video is for educational purposes, and everything that I'm about to say is just information that I have found on the internet and I'm compiling into one video. Just a couple of content warnings before we get into this one. Today we're going to be talking about themes of domestic abuse, manipulative relationships, like emotionally abusive relationships. So if any of that is something you don't want to watch right now, I completely understand. Do click out of this video and look after yourself. That is the most important thing. Hopefully I'll see you again some other time with a different case, but for now, bye. That being said, let's get into the case. So this case actually takes place in 1980s Connecticut, but that's not where we're going to start. First, we're going to take it back 40 years before that to a small town in Denmark. Charlottenlund was a small town just above Copenhagen, and that was where Helle Nielsen was born on July 7th, 1947. Helle Nielsen was raised by her mother Elizabeth and her father Ebe, and she was a very bright, outgoing, vibrant child. She was very intelligent right from being a kid, and like as she grew up, she started to learn all these different languages. She could speak 2 fluently. English and French she could speak fluently, but she could understand a lot of German, Swedish, and Norwegian as well. But Helle was very restricted by her small town. I mean, she enjoyed it there. She was very happy. But her kind of personality, she wanted to be traveling. She wanted to see the world. She wanted to do everything that she could with her life. She was just so interested in like other cultures and other ways of life. She didn't want to stay stuck in her little town forever. And so the first chance she got, she was out of there. So the first thing she did, she became an exchange student, and she came actually over to the UK to do university. And so she was here for a while, and then when she finished that, she didn't feel like going home yet, so she just carried on traveling. From the UK, she went over to Paris and she became an au pair over there, which is similar to a nanny, like a live-in nanny. She was looking after this family and their kids. After a couple of years of that, she did then return to Denmark. She went to a university in Copenhagen where she was becoming a French interpreter, but she was very quickly becoming restless there in Copenhagen. She would become restless after a couple of years in a particular place. She'd be like, right, where am I going next? She knew that she wanted to leave Denmark again pretty quickly, but she wasn't in that much of a rush. She was just going to wait for the opportunity to present itself to her. She wasn't going out looking for new opportunities. And very soon, that opportunity put itself on a silver platter right in front of Helle's face, because one day she was walking through town and she saw this advert for air hostesses, like flight attendants, for people to go and work on planes and be on these long haul flights and like go off to different places for a few days at a time. And this sounded perfect to Helle. Even though, like, of course, being a flight attendant is no walk in the park, you're not going on holiday every week, but you do get to see different things. It's more traveling than she got to do in Copenhagen anyway. So Helle applied for the job. She was one of 200 applicants and they were only going to choose 8. So she was already feeling a little bit wobbly about this. But luckily for her, she was one of those 8. She got the job and she was buzzing. So now Helle worked for Capital Airways and she very quickly made a lot of friends at this job. All these air hostesses really got on with each other and they all loved Helle as well. They all said she was charming, wonderful, funny. People just seemed to be very drawn to her. One of her co-workers said she was quiet, modest, charming, fun, but was a serious person. It seems like she could do everything. She was everything. So in May of 1969, Helle was 22 years old-ish at this point, and she was sent away to Miami for like a training course with a load of other flight crew people. It was kind of like half a holiday, half a course. It was like the course during the day, and then in the evenings they were all allowed to do whatever they wanted. So they'd all just go and sit by the pool and have drinks together, make friends with like all the other flight attendants. And it was on one of these like social evenings that Helle was introduced to a man that she thought was very attractive. His name was Richard Crafts. He was in his early 30s at this point, so almost a decade, probably about a decade older than Helle. And at this point in his life, Richard was living the bachelor lifestyle. Like back at home, he was known to be a player. He had a lot of different girls around all the time. He just wasn't looking for commitment. No one could tie him down, but as soon as he saw Helle, he was taken with her. He was like swept up in her. So just a little bit about Richard and his backstory. He was originally from New York. He came from a very wealthy family. He was a private school boy. He had a very great, like, privileged upbringing, but he didn't do very well in school. He just kind of like wasted his potential there, but he did get into university actually. He went to university for agriculture, but he very quickly became bored of that and dropped out. After he left university, he went into the Marines and he really enjoyed that actually. He specialized in flying helicopters, which is where he first ever learnt to fly, and now it was still his career years later. When he was in the Marines, he was always traveling all over, being stationed in different places, and he enjoyed it at the time, but he ended up leaving the Marines just to become like a normal pilot or like whatever he did. I don't know what the specific job was that he did. Helle was a flight attendant, but I think Richard was something more, maybe like a pilot or I don't know, something more. But yeah, he left the Marines because he just wanted something a lot less demanding. He didn't want to be like moving around all over the place and he didn't want that much pressure. He just wanted like a normal job, you know? And that's exactly what brought him to this training course where he eventually ended up meeting Helle Nielsen. Like I said, as soon as the two of them got talking and flirting, they realized they really liked each other. And Richard thought that he wanted Helle. He thought he wanted like a commitment to her. But as soon as they got home from Miami and it became like real, he started freaking out again. He became a commitment phobe again. So for the next few years, the two of them were in like an on again, off again relationship. Richard would want commitment one minute and he would be with her. And then the next minute he'd be like, no, this isn't what I want. I need to be single. I think the main thing for him was that he didn't want to give up sleeping with other women for Helle. Like he wanted Helle and he wanted a relationship and he wanted, you know, a girlfriend at home at the end of the day. But he also wanted all these other girls, you know? And he couldn't have both, so... But actually, during one of the times that him and Helle were off again, he ended up getting engaged to another woman. So much for not wanting commitment. I mean, this engagement was very quickly called off, but still, he proposed to another woman even though he knows that he doesn't want commitment. After 6 years of an on-again, off-again relationship, Helle actually fell pregnant with Richard's child. And this changed everything in his head. I think this kind of flipped a switch in him and he was like, right, well, this is my woman now and I'm gonna commit. He proposed to Helle and she said yes, and they ended up getting married later that year, so now she was officially Mrs. Helle Crafts. The two of them bought a home together in Connecticut, which is about an hour or two out of New York, where Richard actually grew up. And they settled into this family life really well, actually. They had their child and then actually they went on to have 2 more, so they had 3 kids altogether. And they were a seemingly very perfect, successful, happy family in the area. That was how they seemed to everyone else, at least. But over time, cracks started to show, and it seemed that this family wasn't as perfect as people once thought. On a couple of occasions, Helle had left the house, to go and pick up the kids or to go shopping, and her friends had noticed she had bruises on her face, and she came up with excuses, as to why she had them. But over time, as these bruises just kept showing up on her face, people stopped believing these excuses. It was obvious that something was going on behind closed doors, but no one really knew the extent of it. Helle was being abused terribly, and nobody knew about it. Richard had been emotionally abusing Helle for some time now. He would shout at her all the time, call her names, put her down all the time. And now it seemed that this abuse was becoming physical. We don't have any kind of evidence or reports or stories of the physical abuse other than the bruises on Helle's face. That's the piece of evidence that we have to say that was going on. But something we do have proof of was the financial abuse in this situation. I don't know if that's the correct term to use, but he would make Helle pay for the mortgage on their house, the bills, most of the expenses, while he kept all of his paycheck. He was earning good money as well, twice as much as Helle, but she had to pay for everything, and he wanted to keep his money for his own stuff. And he really would just spend it on anything and everything he wanted. He liked just expensive things. He liked guns, actually. That's one thing that he would spend a lot of the money on. But one of the biggest things that Richard was spending his money on was a second apartment, a whole second apartment in New York for when he had long haul flights and he wanted to stay over there or something. He was paying for a whole place in a different state while Helle had to pay for their family home, all the bills, all the expenses, most things. And he was just spending it on this apartment that he never goes to, really. Actually, that is a lie. He would go to it relatively often, but he wouldn't tell anyone he was going. He would literally just up and leave and go to New York for a few days and then come back as if nothing had ever happened. I wonder what he was doing over there. I mean, I think we can guess what he was probably doing because he didn't want to give up his bachelor lifestyle for Helle, and now he was married to her, so maybe he had to find some other way of still having that. Anyway, in 1982, when Richard was now in his 40s, he felt like his life was getting a little bit repetitive, a little bit boring. He needed something to shake it up, and so he decided to go out and volunteer in the police force. It was a job he'd always been interested in, being a policeman, but it was just something he'd never had time to look into until now. And so obviously, because he was just a volunteer, he was put on all the smaller jobs, being a traffic warden and I don't know, he'd be security at parades and stuff like that. But trust me, he took this job very, very seriously. Actually, way too seriously. I think he just liked the power that came with this job. For example, there was one particular incident where he was directing traffic outside of a church, right? And he got into an argument with a guy in a car, and he got so heated in this argument that he put his hand on his gun as a threat to this guy. Over a traffic argument. He made this guy fear for his life in that moment over a traffic argument. And I actually don't think he got punished or sanctioned for that within the police. I think it just flew under the radar, which is unsurprising yet still disappointing. Just 2 years after that, Richard became quite unwell, and so he went to the doctors and had a load of tests done, and he was actually diagnosed with colon cancer. And with his particular type of cancer, it actually had a very low survival rate. And so Richard and Helle prepared themselves for the worst, prepared themselves that maybe he's not going to be here much longer. And so Helle became the best little carer that she possibly could for her husband. She did everything for that man. She waited on him hand and foot. She would take time off of work when he was particularly bad so that she could be there by his bedside all day, every day. In fact, in particular points during his illness, Helle actually picked up a second job because they were struggling a little bit financially now because she had to take time off work to look after him here and there. And obviously it was only her wage that was paying for the mortgage, the bills, the expenses. Even still now, they're struggling so bad for money that his wife not only has to care for him pretty much full time, but she's now got 2 jobs, yet he still won't give up that New York apartment. He's like, yeah, no, you go out and get another job to look after me. But after 2 years of this, Richard Crafts actually miraculously recovered. And so he and Helle were able to get back to their old lives. But that was exactly the issue. They went back to how they were before he got ill. He was abusive again, emotionally and physically. He hardly thanked Helle for all she'd done for him over the last 2 years. Over the last however many years that they'd been together. She had been the best wife that she could be, and he never once thanked her for anything. If anything, now that he had recovered from his cancer, he was 10 times worse to her. He was treating her worse than he ever had. The emotional abuse was so bad now that Helle knew that she just had to get out of there. She couldn't put up with this any longer. And so she went out and sought help from a divorce lawyer. And one of her reasons for wanting a divorce from Richard was actually that she thought he was having an affair with another woman. And she'd had these suspicions for a while, but she didn't have any, proof. She didn't have any evidence. They were just suspicions. And so the divorce lawyer suggested to Helle that maybe she should hire a private investigator to follow Richard around and try and get some proof, try and get some evidence of this affair. So that's exactly what she did. Helle went out and she found a very qualified PI named Keith Mayo, and immediately he got to work following around Richard Crafts. And on one particular day, Keith Mayo followed Richard all the way to an apartment, just like a random apartment. He got out of his car and he went inside. So Keith waited outside for him to return, and when Richard came back out of this apartment, he was with a woman. So the PI whipped out his camera and he starts taking some pictures as evidence, and he takes these pictures back to Helle, and as soon as she sees them, she's not shocked, because that is the exact woman that she had suspicions about as well. So Helle took this information, and that night she confronted her husband. She told him that she knew he was cheating and he was horrible and abusive to her, and she wanted a divorce. So she told him to get looking for his own divorce lawyer because she'd already found hers. She was finally standing up to the man that had abused her for years. She'd never had the courage to do this before, but now she finally knew her worth, and she wasn't going to take this treatment any longer. But that was when Richard Crafts upped the ante. He began lying to Helle in an attempt to manipulate her into staying with him. It was so disgusting. He told her that he had gotten a call from his oncologist, who's like his cancer doctor, and they said that his cancer had come back and it was 10 times worse this time. Not only that, he also told Helle that he was refusing treatment and refusing to take his medication because if his wife was going to leave him, then he wanted to die anyway. So he wasn't even going to try and get better. And as Helle is sitting there listening to this, she doesn't believe a single word that he's saying. How very convenient that he's going to die the second she starts standing up for herself. In fact, she was so suspicious that same night she actually called the oncologist because she wanted to hear it from himself. But the oncologist told her that Richard hadn't had any recent tests. They actually hadn't seen him in years because, as far as they were aware, he was still in remission. He didn't have cancer anymore. And I'm not sure how Richard reacted when Helle found this out, but I'm glad she made that call anyway. In general, Richard was just being very stubborn about this divorce. He was dragging his heels because I really think he thought he could manipulate Helle into staying, but he couldn't. He was trying, but she wasn't having it. On her side of things, she was going at the speed of light. She was trying to get out of this divorce as quick as she possibly could, and her lawyers were doing everything they could to make that happen. And for the next few months, as the divorce was in its very early stages, they tried to keep things as normal as they could around the house, mainly for the kids' sake. In fact, things were actually getting so stressful that they decided they needed a bit of help when it came to the kids because they weren't getting on very well, and so they weren't being the best parents that they could be. And so they decided to hire a live-in nanny named Marie. Marie fit in very well with the family. She got on really well with the kids and she was really good at her job. And to be honest, Helle and Richard felt a huge weight lifted off their shoulders once they hired Marie. On November 15th, 1986, Helle was 39 years old at this point, and she was due to go on another long-distance trip to Hamburg. She was away for a few days. They would always be away for a few days at a time on these flights, and while she was away, she confided in all of her air hostess friends about her messy divorce. She said she was pretty anxious about the whole thing because Richard was actually getting more abusive as things were going on, but she did say that she knew it was going to be the best thing in the long run for her and her kids. So anyway, a few days later, Helle and all of her co-workers get back from Hamburg, and one of her co-workers actually gives her a lift back home on November 18th, and they dropped her off at home at about 7 p.m. that night. As they pulled up to her house, Helle actually noticed that Richard's truck was in the driveway, and she let out a sigh, and she just turned to her friend and she was like, Richard's home. She really didn't want to see him. She really didn't, because she knew what was going to come. She knew it was going to be argument after argument after argument, and she just didn't want to deal with that. But she had no choice. Her kids were in that house as well. So anyway, she said goodbye to her friend at 7 p.m. and she went inside the house. Later that same night, at 3:35 a.m., like in the middle of the night, the live-in nanny, Marie, was awoken to Richard Crafts knocking on her door. He told her that all the power had just gone out in the house and they all needed to leave while he sorted it out. He said that they were all going to go to his sister's house, whatever, and so Marie was like, okay, where's Helle? And he said, oh, she's already there. She's already at my sister's. So Marie got dressed, she got in the car with all the kids, and Richard took them to his sister's house. But when they got there, Helle wasn't there. And so Marie asked again. She was like, oh, where's Helle? And at this point, Richard got quite snappy and he was just like, I don't know. And Marie was quite taken aback by this, but, you know, there were quite a few factors at play. It was the middle of the night. They were going through a messy divorce, you know. She just left it. She just didn't want to pry any further. So Richard left Marie and the children at his sister's house while he went back to their house to go and sort out the electrical issue. And the next Marie heard of him was at 12 p.m. the next day. So like midday the next day. And he was just calling her to let her know that the power was still out and he still hadn't fixed it. I don't know, just giving her an update, I suppose. The next time they heard from him was at 3 p.m. when he called his sister this time, and he told her that the power was fixed now, but he wasn't going to be home for a while because his car had slid in the driveway or something like that. I don't know. Either way, he didn't come and pick Marie and the kids up until 9 p.m. that night. So he'd been gone at the house by himself for 12 hours trying to fix the power. So he went and picked the kids and Marie up, and they went back to their house where the electricity was now fixed, but there was still no Helle. Helle was nowhere through this whole day. And at this point, Marie really just didn't want to ask. Richard seemed really stressed, especially with the day that he just had, like fixing the power in the house and whatever, and his car sliding in the driveway. Like, Marie didn't ask any questions. That was until the next morning when the phone rang in the house. So Marie went and answered it, and it was one of Helle's co-workers asking how she was, asking to speak to her. And so Marie said, oh no, I actually haven't seen or heard from her in like 2 days. I think she's on a long haul flight. And immediately the friend was like, no, I don't think she is. This co-worker on the phone, it was like Helle's best friend at work. Her name was Anna. And Anna was on pretty much all the same flights that Helle was, and they weren't due to be on a flight then. In fact, it was actually against like safety regulations for Helle to be on another flight right then, because there's a rule that they have to wait like 49 hours, I think it is, between these long flights. So by law, they actually have to have a few days off work in between each flight, and it hadn't been a few days. Helle hadn't been seen literally since she got back from her last flight. So it's not like she got back and then went straight back to the airport. That's not allowed. So Anne, this co-worker, was really quite confused. She couldn't understand where Helle was. And that was when she remembered something haunting that Helle had said in conversation with her just a few days prior. Helle had been confiding in Anna about this messy divorce and about how she was really anxious about her husband, and then she made one particular comment: if something happens to me, don't assume it was an accident. So Anna told Marie to get in contact with the police immediately and report Helle Crafts as missing. But Marie wasn't quite convinced. She didn't think that anything bad had happened to Helle, and she thought that they should just wait it out, wait for wait for Helle to get in contact with them. Once Marie got off the phone, I think she went and mentioned to Richard that one of Helle's co-workers was calling up concerned about her. And so later that night, Richard went and called Anna back himself. He told her that he wanted to explain the situation, and that was that Helle's mother, back in Denmark, had been taken very ill, very suddenly ill, and so Helle literally had to get on the first flight that she possibly could to Denmark, so that's where she'd been for the last 2 days. And Anna was quite confused hearing this. Remember, Helle was literally her best friend. How can you not know that your best friend's mum is ill? That's the kind of thing that Helle would tell her. But Richard even said to Anna, he was like, look, if you don't believe me, I'll give you her mother's number so you can get in contact with them both and you know, speak to them both out in Denmark if you want. So he gave this number to Anna, but she didn't actually end up using it. I mean, would you? Would you want to call someone's ill mother just to like double check that they're ill? I don't think many people would do that, so she didn't call. Anyway, by Saturday, November 22nd, Helle Crafts was due to go on her next flight. This one was going to be from JFK Airport all the way to Germany. By now, it had been 4 days since anyone had last seen or heard from her, and so no one really knew if she was going to even turn up for work or not. When Anna arrived in the staff car park at JFK Airport, she actually saw Helle's little blue car parked in the car park, and so she thought, oh great, well that means she's at work then. Although when Anna did go into work and she got on her flight and everything, she couldn't see Helle anywhere, and so she just thought, oh well, maybe she's on a different flight to her. But when Anna arrived back at JFK Airport 2 days later and she went out to the car park to get in her own car, Helle's was still there. Her car was still parked there. And then it hit her. Why was Helle's car in the staff car park at JFK Airport when she'd supposedly just got on like a normal customer flight to Denmark to go and see her mother? Why had she left her car there? It's a weird place for her to leave her car, is it not, when she's not working? Would it not be in the normal customer car park or even left at home? So now Anna was suspicious all over again, and she decided that it was time for her to use that phone number that Richard had given her. She was going to call and she was going to find out what was really going on in Denmark. But as soon as she dialed this number, it wasn't recognised. It wasn't a real number. Richard had given her a fake number. So she called up Richard and she was like, this number you've given me is fake. And he said that that was the only one he had. He didn't have any other way of trying to find the correct number for her. The only other thing that he could think for her to do was to try and get in contact with Helle's cousins over in California and ask them if they had the correct number for her mother over in Denmark. And he wanted Anna to do all of this, you know, to go and speak to the cousins and then find that number and go, you know what I mean? And she was like, look, I don't know any of these people. I don't know Helle's family. You do. Can you do all this ringing round to find the correct number, please? And Richard said, maybe, if he could find the time. She couldn't understand why Richard was being so difficult when she's just trying to locate her friend, his wife. Why does he not want to, help out here? So Anna shared her concerns once again with the nanny, Marie. They would have these conversations kind of semi-regularly now because they both kind of suspected Richard of something. Then on November 25th, so at this point it had been a full week since Helle was last seen, and Marie remembered something really quite eerie now that Helle had been gone for a week. Marie told Anna that she'd seen a dark stain in the carpet in the master bedroom, and within a couple of days, Richard Crafts had pulled out all the carpets in that room and had new ones fitted. Not only that, but within the last few days, probably since Helle had gone missing actually, Marie noticed that her address book was missing from her bedside table. And she thought that was really weird because she never took her address book out of the drawer. She kept it there literally for safekeeping. It wasn't like she'd mislaid it because she literally never took it out of there. So all of a sudden, it's nowhere to be found, but she had all of Helle's family's contact numbers in there, all their addresses, all their phone numbers, and as soon as Helle goes missing, so does that address book. And so now Marie's thinking that maybe Richard had snuck into her bedroom, stolen her address book, and hidden it or destroyed it or something so that she wouldn't be able to get in contact with any of Helle's family. It really seemed like Richard was intentionally trying to get in the way of all of Helle's friends, family, co-workers from trying to find her. And then the next day, Anna went back into work, and again, she was talking to all of their co-worker flight attendant friends about how worried she was about Helle. This was a daily occurrence, or like at least every time they went into work, because all her friends were concerned. Like I said, she had a lot of friends. She was a very social lady, and so there were a lot of people that were very concerned about her whereabouts. And that was when one other lady actually said that she'd had very similar conversations with Helle in the days leading up to her disappearance, you know, where she's saying that if something happens to her, it's not an accident. It turned out she'd said something like that to quite a few different friends. It was almost as if she knew something bad was gonna happen to her. She knew that something was coming. So Helle's co-workers decided to go on a mission to try and find the correct phone number for her mother back over in Denmark, because they needed to know if she was actually there or not. So they start calling round every single one of Helle's friends or family members that they possibly could, and eventually they got hold of this number. And it turned out that the original number that Anna was given by Richard was off by one number. He had changed one number in the area code so that they wouldn't be able to get hold of her mother. But now they had the real number, and so they called it up, and her mother answered. But that was when their worst fears were confirmed, because it turned out her mother was completely fine. She wasn't ill, and Helle wasn't there in Denmark. She hadn't been at all, because her mother wasn't ill. This was all a lie. So now it seemed that Richard had been lying about his wife's whereabouts for the last week. And so all of her friends went down to that house to confront him about it. And the way that this man tried to defend himself, right? He said that he was telling the truth, and it was Helle's mother that was lying. He said that Helle had gone over to Denmark. Her mother was ill, and Helle was over there looking after her. But then he went on to say that her mother had lied about health matters in the past. Something about like her husband had been ill before and she lied about it on the phone to Richard and Helle. Something like that. He was basically trying to say she's done this kind of thing before, she's probably doing it again, so believe me, not her. But he could tell that Helle's friends weren't really buying this story, and so he actually offered up another possible place that Helle could be. This time he suggested that she might have gone to Paris to go and meet a friend called Vivi. And immediately all her friends were like, who the hell is Vivi? I've never heard her talk about a Vivi before in her life. And these were like her closest friends. They just felt like Richard Crafts was clutching at straws here. He was desperately just trying to give them the most like semi-believable excuse that he could, and they weren't buying it. And so as soon as they finished confronting him at that house, one of these friends went to the police station and told the police everything that was going on. For the first time, actually. This is the first time police were involved. About a week later, there was still no sign of Helle Crafts. She's been missing for 2 weeks at this point, and police decided to call Richard Crafts into the police station for an interview. And police actually got an entirely different story to either of the other stories that Richard had been given. He didn't say she was in Denmark. He didn't say she was in Paris. This time, he said that she'd run off with a lover, a guy that she'd been having an affair with. She'd run off and left him. And he said the reason he'd been lying about her whereabouts for so long was because he was embarrassed to admit that his wife had left him for another man and run off with him. So he was saying that she was looking after her sick mother in Denmark. Police asked him why he'd never reported Helle missing over the last 2 weeks. Even if he thought she'd run off with a lover, her affair, like he should have still reported her missing. And he said to the police, he was like, oh, well, I was actually going to come tonight, but you'd already called me in. Convenient, isn't it? Police had their suspicions of this man for sure, and so they asked Richard Crafts if he would be willing to take a polygraph test, like a lie detector test, and he agreed. He was willing to do one. Obviously, these days, in 2022, we know that polygraph tests are not very accurate. They're not an exact science. They're not admissible in court because they're a bit naff. They're not that great. But back in '86, at the time, they were like, everyone loved them. They were like the new development in crime investigating, and so everyone was buzzing about this new technology. Everyone thought they were really good, really accurate. You can see where I'm going with this, can't you? So Richard went in for this test, and he answered 9 questions about Helle's whereabouts, and he passed every single one of them. he wasn't lying as far as this polygraph was aware. He seemed very much innocent and no one really questioned it, apart from one particular police officer who knew about Richard Kraft's past in the Marines, and I think he'd had some other jobs in kind of similar areas. I don't know. But they did know that he had previous experience working with polygraph tests. And so this other officer suggested, like, what if he knows how to get around it? What if he knows how to beat it and make it look like he's telling the truth when he's actually lying? And it was this one particular officer that kept trying to, like, bring people back down to earth. Like, no, maybe he's not innocent. Maybe this one test is just a bit dodgy. Maybe we can't trust his answers in this test. So for that reason, Richard Crafts wasn't fully ruled out as a suspect, and police continued to look into him in other ways. So the next thing police did was they got a hold of Richard Crafts' credit card records to see what he'd been buying, like, in the days leading up to the disappearance and in the days after, in case there was anything suspicious. And gosh, was there. In the days after Helle went missing, they found that he'd bought a new set of bedding. And this, paired with the stain in the carpet, obviously he'd ripped up all the carpets and put new carpets in. What was he trying to get rid of? What mess had he made in that bedroom that he was desperately trying to get rid of? So they pulled him in for another interview because they wanted an explanation for this. And Richard sat there and he was like, oh yeah, I spilled kerosene all over my bed and all over the carpet, so I had to get new bedding and carpets. Kerosene? I don't know why anyone would be carrying kerosene around their bedroom. Kerosene, if you don't know, it's like a fuel. I think mainly for aircrafts and stuff. It's like an oil that's obviously gonna stain if you get it on your bed and your carpet. Who carries kerosene through their bedroom? Like, I know he's a pilot, I know he's a flyer, but even still, like, how many pilots are just, like, carrying kerosene through their room? I don't know. Anyway, police didn't believe it either. But, I mean, how much can they argue that? Because the old bedding and the old carpet is already gone. So they can't test it or anything. They just kind of had to take his word on that. So they let him go and they went back to the credit card records because, I mean, it brought up good evidence the first time. And that was when they saw that in the days before Helle went missing, Richard had actually ordered a wood chipper. Such a random purchase. I mean, Richard wasn't a gardener. He wasn't trying to get rid of loads of trees in their garden or something. Why was he buying a wood chipper? As soon as police saw that purchase on his credit card, they were worried. And they knew they needed to get a search warrant for his house ASAP. But this search warrant, because they hadn't actually, like, arrested Richard Crafts or anything, it was going to take a while to get the search warrant. Actually, it didn't come through until Christmas Eve. So that's way over a month into the investigation until they actually finally got this search warrant. But before we get into the details of the search, something else actually happened a few days before the search that police had no idea about. And that was that the nanny, Marie, had found something very incriminating in that house. On December 20th, Richard Kraft's sister, Karen, was going to come to their house and pick up Marie and the kids and take them to Florida, I think. They were going to Florida for Christmas. I believe Richard was going to come and join them in a few days. I think he had more work to do before he could come to Florida. So anyway, Karen gets to the house to pick them up, but Marie approaches her before they leave and she just said, there's something I want to show you. So they left the kids downstairs and Marie took Karen all the way up to the master bedroom and she started taking the bedding off of the bed, and then she revealed the mattress underneath. And this mattress had a huge brown stain on it. It was that kind of brown where they could just tell it was like old blood. It even looked like someone had tried to, like, wash it out but struggled to, and the colour ultimately stayed. In fact, there were a few more, like, spots around the mattress and, like, other marks that it looked like it had been, like, scrubbed at. It seemed that someone was trying to get these stains off, but it was too hard, and so they just covered it with the bedding. And I don't actually know how Richard's sister Karen reacted to this. All I do know is that her and Marie decided to stay quiet about this. They didn't tell anyone. They didn't tell the police. They just went to Florida for Christmas as if nothing had happened. And so when that search warrant came through on Christmas Eve, the team decided to go in first thing in the morning on Christmas Day. They knew that Richard and the children weren't going to be there, so now was the perfect time for them to search this whole house, top to bottom. And as soon as they went in, immediately they noted down that it was a mess. It looked like that place hadn't been cleaned or tidied in weeks, probably since Helle had last been there. And then detectives noticed a note on the fridge, and this note was from Richard to Helle, and he was like begging her that if she comes home to come to Florida with him and the kids for Christmas, come and meet them there. But something interesting about this note, it was dated December 23rd, but police knew that Richard had left the house the day before, on the 22nd. He hadn't been in there on the 23rd. So anyway, the search team started making their way through the rest of the house. Of course, they go up to the bedroom, and there they find that blood-stained mattress. And as soon as they found this, they already knew the direction that this investigation was going to go in. And so they decided to actually call off the search for the day, then and there. I mean, it was Christmas Day. They all wanted to go and spend time with their families, and they knew that this was going to be a big investigation. If they've just found a blood-stained mattress, they've got to do a lot of hours in that house, and they weren't willing to do it on Christmas Day. I don't blame them. So they all went home, spent Christmas Day with their families, and then the next morning, on the 26th, they were all back to work. And when they did, one of the officers took that blood-stained mattress to the lab for testing, and immediately they could already tell that it was human blood. And after a few more tests, they were able to narrow that down and find out that it was type O human blood. So they pulled up Hellcrafts like medical information and stuff, and she had type O blood. And while there was no way to confirm if it was her blood on that mattress, because they didn't have any of her blood to test it against, or her DNA or anything, but it certainly seemed like that was probably Helle's blood on her own bed. That same evening, actually, police back at the station received a phone call from someone claiming to have a potentially groundbreaking lead for them in this case. The caller was a man named Joey, and Joey was a snowplow driver, and he would usually work night shifts around a local lake, making sure that it was safe for people that were going to be walking around there. And he remembered seeing something quite concerning, quite odd, around the time that Hellcrafts disappeared. On this particular night, he'd been working through the night as he often did, and it was about 4 a.m. when he saw a man in like a big bright orange parka coat using a wood chipper by the lake. Let me remind you, it was 4 in the morning. And at the time, Joey remembered seeing this and thinking it was really weird actually, because they were in the middle of a snowstorm that night. Not only was it 4 a.m. in the morning, but this guy was doing his wood chipping in the middle of a snowstorm as well. Literally, who in their right mind is wood chipping at 4 a.m. in the middle of a snowstorm? And as soon as police heard that, they thought the exact same thing. That is so suspicious. And they knew, Joey didn't know this, but they knew that Richard Crafts had bought a wood chipper on his credit card a couple of days before Helle went missing. And so police agreed this was a groundbreaking lead in this investigation. So they asked Joey if he could take them down to that exact spot by the lake where he'd seen this guy in the wood chipper. And so he did. He took them down there, and they cordoned off the area and they started having a search. And immediately they found quite a lot of stuff. They found some wood chippings all over the floor. They also found a lot of small scraps of blue material and small scraps of paper as well. So they start picking up kind of the larger pieces of paper, because they can see that some of them have writing on. So they're picking up the large pieces of paper to try and read them. And on one particular piece of paper, it was addressed to a Mrs. Helle Crafts. So this just confirmed that this area was part of the crime scene, and so it was all taped up, forensic teams were brought in, all these search teams, but already police were quite nervous about how this was going to go. So to put it bluntly, police believed that Richard Crafts had killed his wife and then put her dead body through this wood chipper to dispose of her. And they think he'd also aimed this wood chipper at the lake so that the pieces of her body would just spray out onto the lake and essentially dispose of themselves. And if that was the case, if police were right about that, then that meant it was going to be one hell of a task for them to actually search that lake and find pieces of her body. It was a massive, massive lake, and it was going to take a lot of diving teams, a lot of hours, possibly even months of just swimming and diving and searching. But they did what they had to do because, well, I mean, it was quite obvious what had happened to Helle at this point, and they knew they needed to solve this case. There was no way in hell that they were going to give up on this when they were clearly so close to finding out what happened to her. And so they sent all those diving teams in there and they got to work. And these diving teams really delivered. They delivered on the evidence. In total, they found 2,660 long bleached hairs in that lake. And while they can't confirm that they are or are not Hellcraft's hairs, Helle did bleach her hair. So, I mean, it's likely. Some of the other things that they found, I'm just going to list these off now. They found a human tooth, a dental crown, a piece of human skull along with 60 other small bone fragments, and 3 ounces worth of human tissue scraps. But that's not all. Possibly the most horrifying thing that they found was the tip of a human finger, and the fingernail was painted red. So police got back in touch with the search that was still going on in Helle's house. That was still a thing. And they basically told them that they'd found this finger with red nail polish on. And that was when one of the search officers remembered seeing some red nail polish in Helle's bathroom. So they ran up there and yeah, there was a bottle of nail polish literally still out in the bathroom as if she'd freshly painted her nails before she'd gone missing. So they grabbed this nail polish and also the finger and they took them both to the lab and they were tested, and it was found that this nail polish on the finger was the exact same as that one found in her bathroom. So that pretty much identified that that was her finger. So those were all the kind of body parts that they found, but the divers weren't done there because they actually found the engine of a chainsaw. So of course they pulled this out and that was also sent to the lab, and immediately as soon as they heard that they'd found like a piece of machinery, they were like, where's the serial number? Find that serial number. Because if you can find the serial number on things like this, you can trace, you know, where it came from and who bought it as well. That would be their golden nugget piece of evidence. If they could find that serial number, they could find out who bought this and probably who killed Helle. But it seemed that somebody already knew that. Somebody already knew how important the serial number was, and it had been sanded off. Someone had intentionally, like, rubbed it off so that they wouldn't know what the serial number was. But, like, come on. These lab technicians, these professionals, they have ways. They have their ways. I don't know the ways, so I can't really explain it to you. But after, like, doing some on it, they were able to find out their number. So yeah, after a few days, they managed to figure out this serial number, and then they put it in on this like system that they had, and they were able to pull up loads of information about this chainsaw, including the warranty that the owner of said chainsaw had signed when they bought it, and the signature on that warranty, it was Richard Kraft's. Not only that, but that same day, the tests came back on that human tooth that they found in the lake. They'd compared it against Hellcraft's dental records, and it was a match. That was her tooth, her finger. It seemed that she had been murdered, and her body parts had been put in a wood chipper into this lake. And this was all the evidence police needed to go down and arrest Richard Crafts on suspicion of the murder of his wife. They arrested him on January 13th, which is almost 2 months after Helle even went missing. So his trial began over a year later, and he was maintaining his innocence through this whole thing. He pleaded not guilty. However, it was during this trial that we actually learn that this murder was likely premeditated. Because until now, everyone that knew Helle and Richard Crafts had assumed that this had just been an awful argument that had ended in murder. Because everyone knew what Richard was like. Everyone knew that he'd been emotionally abusive for years, physically abusive from time to time. Like, it seemed that that was kind of the natural progression that their relationship was having. But based on the evidence that was presented in this trial, it seemed that Richard Crafts had been planning this for a little while before he actually did it. On November 10th, which is 8 days before Hellcrafts disappeared, Richard ordered a pickup truck, and he wanted this pickup truck reinforcing with like a special upgrade that would make it like stronger. Basically, he told the company that he wanted to be able to carry like very heavy equipment in the back of this truck, and so he needed it reinforcing, and they were like, okay, Can do. It's going to take a few days though. So in the meantime, so while that truck was getting upgraded and whatever, in the meantime, on November 14th, Richard calls up this wood chipper rental company and tells them that he wants to reserve a large wood chipper for November 18th. So he gets that reservation all booked in, he comes off the phone to the wood chipper company, and then straight away he goes out and he buys a large freezer, like a chest freezer, big enough to keep a human body in. And by November 18th, he had picked up all his different pieces of equipment, the truck, the freezer, the wood chipper, and now he just waited for Helle to return home from work that evening around 7 p.m. Supposedly, as soon as Helle walked through the door that day, Richard was argumentative. They were fighting from the second she got home. The fighting continued until the kids went to bed. They put the kids to bed and then they continued arguing after that. And now we don't know exactly what happened after this because the only person that knows for sure is Richard Crafts, and he still maintains his innocence. He's never told like the fully accurate story of what happened. So this is just like police theory based on the evidence and stuff like that. They think that Helle was standing at the bottom of the bed doing something, you know, maybe folding clothes or something like that, when Richard came up behind her with his police flashlight in his hand and hit her over the head with it. They believe that Helle fell to the ground with this hit, and so Richard got down by her and hit her again over the head. And now they think it was that second hit that actually killed her. So this was over very quickly. He killed her very quickly. So right now, all the kids were in bed, and Marie, the live-in nanny, she actually had a second job. She used to go out and do night shifts a few nights a week, and she was actually out at this point in time. So Richard took advantage of, you know, the quiet house, and he started dragging his wife's dead body down the stairs and outside to the garage, because that was where he was keeping this chest freezer. And so he opened the freezer, put her body inside, and just left her there for the time being. He went back inside for a while. Around 2 a.m, Marie came home from her other job, and so I think Richard just like pretended to be asleep or something. He waited until Marie had gone to her bedroom and she was definitely asleep, and then he went back downstairs to the garage. He backed up his new pickup truck so that it was like right outside the garage, and then he started loading this massive freezer into the back of the pickup truck. And this whole thing, by the way, was going on right underneath Marie's bedroom. The garage was underneath her bedroom. So Richard is doing everything like as quietly and slowly as he possibly can so that he doesn't wake Marie up. But then the power went out. And people think that Richard did this on purpose, like he turned the power off so that he would have an excuse to get Marie and the kids out of the house and to his sister's. So obviously he went in, woke Marie up, took them all to his sister's house, and then he returned to continue the disposing of his wife's body. By this point, Helle's body had completely frozen in that freezer. I think the garage was on like a different electricity supply to the rest of the house, so actually the freezer hadn't gone off this whole time. So he got his wife's frozen body out of the freezer, and he grabbed that chainsaw and he starts dismembering her body into tiny pieces. And these smaller pieces, every time he would like cut a piece off of Helle, he would then throw it back into the freezer because he wanted to keep him, you know, frozen. Once he'd finished with that, he then fixed the power in the house, and then he went and picked up Marie and the kids and brought them back to the house, where their mother's dead, dismembered, frozen body was just feet away from them. And then that night, when all of the kids were asleep again, and so was Marie, Richard continued the rest of his plan. He got out of his bed in the middle of the night, he went and jumped in the pickup truck that had Helle's body in the freezer in the back and the wood chipper, and he drove out to the lake. And there he got this wood chipper out of the back of the truck and lined it up perfectly so that anything he put in it would just spray straight out into the lake. And then he started putting these bits of his wife's body through the wood chipper, and he was just watching bits of her flesh flying out into this water. And between every body part that he would put in like a real piece of wood as well, partly like to clean the machine, because obviously he can't send this machine back with like chunks of human flesh stuck in the mechanisms. But he was also just trying to make it look like this wood chipper was being used for its intended purposes. If he was to leave like wood chips all over the ground, then fair enough, he was using a wood chipper. I have no idea what Richard did with the wood chipper or the freezer or the pickup truck, actually. I don't think they ever found any of those three things again. I mean, they obviously all ended up going back to the companies that he rented them off, but I don't know, they couldn't like trace them down. But anyway, once all of this information had been presented to the court, the jury went to deliberate, and they were deliberating for 17 days. This kind of thing normally takes just hours. They were gone for 17 days. But the jury just could not agree for some reason on whether Richard Crafts was guilty or not guilty. And they actually went into deadlock over this. And the way that this actually ended was with one of the jurors named Warren literally just getting up and leaving the room and refusing to come back, saying, I just don't think he did it. So the trial was actually declared a mistrial, and a new trial had to be set up. So one quickly was, and that one went a lot easier than the first one, and very quickly Richard Crafts was found guilty of the murder of Hellcrafts. And this was huge because I think this was the first, or one of the first, no, I think it was the first murder conviction where they actually didn't have a body. They didn't really have proof that she was dead. I mean, they did have her tooth, and they did have her finger, and they did have a lot of her hair, but realistically, she could still be alive somewhere without those body parts, you know? So for this murder, Richard Crafts was sentenced to 50 years in prison, and he served it quietly for the most part, apart from one particular interview that he did in 1996. This is the only interview he has ever done. He's never done one since, and I think it's probably for the best. Because in this interview, Richard said to this journalist that he could escape from that maximum security prison anytime he wanted. So the journalist asked him, well, if you can escape, why haven't you done it yet? And he replied, because that would undermine everything that I've been working for. Presuming he means like good behavior in prison so that he can have an early release. And actually that worked for him because Richard Crafts is out of prison now. He actually only served 30 years because of good behavior. 30 years for murdering his wife and literally shredding up her body in a wood chipper. That is the most horrendous thing. 30 years is just crazy. He was 82 years old when he was released from prison in 2020. So that'll make him like 84, 85 now. And the last we heard of Richard Crafts, I don't know if he's still there or not, the last we heard was that he was at a halfway house trying to like integrate back into society. So he's probably out there by now. I mean, if he's been in that halfway house for like 2 years, he could be out by now, just mingling among the rest of us. But that is all I have for this case. Thank you so much for watching, and thanks again to Magellan TV for sponsoring this video. Remember, they're giving you guys a 1-month free trial to kick off your subscription, so what are you waiting for? Go to the link down below in the description to sign up. A huge thank you to all of my channel members for supporting the channel and helping me decide the cases that I cover. All of my tier 2 members are on screen right now, so thank you so much. If you want to become a channel member, you can click the join button down below. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please leave a thumbs up down below, or you can watch this video. I'm gonna pick you one out special, or you could just subscribe to my channel if you want, because I post this kind of stuff all the time. Anyway, see you later.